Tom, a few places to jump off today. Where would you like to start?
Well, I'd start with the article that appeared in CBC earlier in the day. I thought they did a pretty darn good job looking at the effects of Bill 96 that a lot of people have underestimated. I'll give you an example. When we bought our new microwave a couple of years ago, there was a nice little plate that came with it, and you could put that over the embossed English words that came from the factory in whatever country where the microwave was made, and you could have the French wording. But the way it's written now, they're coming up with rules that will require that the machine itself originally be made with French words. Now, they're going to argue on the Quebec government side, well, this is about protecting French and we'll accept nothing less. But what's happening with a lot, and I've had people in the industry contact me saying, you do realize that these massive companies in the States or in Europe are not going to start remanufacturing everything with French embossed. They'll always provide the ability to put French on it, and they'll respect that because that exists. But at the same time, when you talk to Roberge, and a lot of these people have, they're just spoiling for a fight. It's almost as if the CAC wants this stuff to go to court to get a negative decision so that they can say how downtrodden they are. So it is going to go to court because several big law firms are quoted in the piece as saying, look, we've got clients who are worried about their ability to protect their trademarks, for example, and we all know trademark is an exclusively federal jurisdiction. So the Quebec government has been overreaching constantly. They've been looking for a way to outdo Bill 101 to say that they're doing more. In other words, trying to convince people that they're stronger than the Parti Québécois on this stuff. The Parti Québécois is always going to say that no matter what the CAQ does, it's not enough, and that we need to separate. And that's what all this is feeding. But Legault and his team are a little bit naive about that, and they're going to keep pushing, even though it's a race to the bottom for Quebec.
Tom, is there some merit to this idea that this will force some people, some manufacturers anyway, to just simply say, not going to bother, it's not worth the cost?
There's stuff that's happening like that already. And they're doing it discreetly, and they're just walking away from the market. But, for example, some people say, well, you could just go ahead and order it online, which is true. But then the Quebec government believes it's actually going to have rules that would stop Amazon from filling your order and shipping it to you here in Quebec. Well, good luck with that. I mean, the same thing. I mean, today they were on about how they were going to demand that Netflix operate,
Right.
have everything in French. So you can stand on a street corner and stand on a soapbox and scream that, that this is the way it's going to be. But that's not the way the world works. And it's not what's going to happen. But again, it's a way of spoiling for a fight and saying, oh, woe is me. If, things should be better. This shouldn't exist the way it is. But that's the world that we live in.
You're right. This is the old let's out PQ the PQ.
This is the game that he's been playing since he lost that by-election in October. And we saw it last week, 4 people at a table lamenting about the feds not doing enough. Quebec has a very valid argument. But Mark Miller couldn't have been clearer today. He said, look, if this is the case, we sit down and we discuss it. We deal with these complex issues amongst ourselves all the time. But what Miller was pointing out is this came out of nowhere. There was no formal demand. There was nothing in writing. There's never anything that's been explicit. There's no study backing up those figures. And both Pablo Rodriguez last week and Mark Miller this week are just saying, if you want to sit down and talk about this stuff, we're open.
Right.
And by the way, the feds have already cut them a check for $100 million, which isn't exactly chump change. But Quebec's saying it costs a whole bunch more. Prove it. And then the feds seem to be willing to sit down and talk about it. Miller didn't slam the door on them. But again, this is the whole approach of the CAC. It's just, it's terrible. We can't get what we need and what we want. Well, no, before somebody sends you $1 billion, you're going to have to state your case and back it up.
Let me get to the other big story today. We found out definitively that there will be a court ruling on Thursday afternoon at 2:15 on Bill 21. So I'm curious, first of all, here we are. This is going back to November of 2022. We're finally going to get something on this. But this is really not the end of anything. It's the beginning of the next round, isn't it?
Well said, and it's exactly what will happen. I mean, the feds will have no choice but to get involved if and when it gets to the Supreme Court. I still think that Trudeau made an incredible strategic blunder when he didn't just pull the Band-Aid off, send this whole thing to the Supreme Court from the beginning. It's been dragging on since then. Marc-André Blanchard, the first instance judge, Superior Court, said Bill 21, discriminatory, but except for this part dealing with the English school boards, it is saved by the notwithstanding clause. Will the Court of Appeal take a different approach? remains to be seen. I'm not convinced that there is a different approach to be taken on the notwithstanding clause. But what's interesting is last week's little rant that you and I spoke about by Legault against the Quebec Court of Appeal. You might recall it was on a completely different subject. It was about whether or not the children of asylum seekers would be allowed to attend subsidized daycare in Quebec. Legault let fly with one of his classics, saying, well, what about good little Quebecers? What do we do with them? So it had all the types of things that we've come to lament about Legault. But he then took a poke at the Quebec Court of Appeal, and he said, the Parti québécois, accepting the Quebec Court of Appeal's decision on this, not realizing that they're just a bunch of judges named by the federal government. The Quebec Bar Association, which doesn't get involved in these fights often, if ever, they had no choice but to say, what are you doing? You're the premier of the province of Quebec, and you're out there saying that judges don't have credibility because they're named by the federal government? That doesn't even make sense. They're Quebecers. They're our best judges. They're our highest court. But I think that there must have been enough information that this was in the works for Legault to have decided, I'm going to start softening up my target a little bit just in case this thing goes south in a way that we're not expecting. And Legault's really totally inappropriate and unacceptable attack against the Court of Appeal, I think, has to be read in the context of this impending decision, amongst others.
By the way, forgive me for bringing this up. This idea of challenging courts and challenging judges here, there's a very Donald Trump sort of smell to this,
Absolutely.
is there not?
Absolutely. From the beginning. This court is dominated by Democratic and named judges and everything like that. Sure. And every time he gets banged out by a judge, they've got an agenda, they hate me, and blah, blah, blah. Sure.
Hate to see that happening here. All right,
shoot the messenger.
Yeah, exactly. Let me move on to this Online Harm Act. It's being talked about a little bit. I mean, I realize it's a bit premature. It was only tabled yesterday, but there are already people sort of weighing in on both sides here. What do you think?
I think it's very balanced. I think Trudeau has done a really good job with this. They did take their time coming back with something that would work, but I'll give you an example of how well it was done. Last week, when Poilievre was pitched a question about the online harms bill, he just went into a rant about Trudeau in blackface, saying, well, who's he to dictate morals on any subject to anybody else because he got dressed up in these racist costumes. It was total non sequitur, classic Poilievre. Just stirring the pot and going off in all sorts of different directions and saying clearly that he was going to be against this thing because it was going to be taking away free speech. And he had a great one-liner. He said, for Trudeau, hate speech is any speech that he hates, meaning anybody who disagrees with him, he'll try to bang out. Well, this thing has turned out to be so balanced, so well put together, that the Conservatives completely changed their tune and put out a notice this afternoon saying, well, we don't think it should be this new bureaucracy. We think it should be the courts, but we should be really tough on speech and go after people who are harming our kids. So it's very interesting. I have not seen this type of flip-flop by Pierre Poilievre since he got the job, but on this one, he was so completely offside with good common sense that he had to back off.
Last thing I want to bring up, Jagmeet Singh taking a victory lap in working out a pharmacare deal.
Two
in working out a deal. And then literally a day later, you have, first of all, we know Quebec that wants nothing to do with a national pharmacare plan. But then Danielle Smith, or at least the health minister there, saying, you know what? We were never consulted. We should have been, and we're not going to get involved in this either. We're going to opt out. Did Jagmeet Singh make a mistake here or not?
No, not at all. It was a deal that he announced with the feds, and there will be legislation for it. And I'll give you the example of where this is possible. You remember when Trudeau came up with his child care plan, largely stolen from what the NDP had put together in the 2015 campaign? I was glad they stole it because it was long overdue to have a national child care plan. So provinces that already had a good plan, like Quebec, were just sent a check with no conditions. Oh, you've already got everything that we're asking other people to do. Here's your check. The same thing could happen here. Quebec, by the way, has the most extensive coverage for prescription drugs in Canada. So Legault is crying wolf because basically the feds are just going to say, here's your check. You're already covering most of this stuff. But in provinces that don't have that sort of coverage, you know how we always complain that we always look at our system and we say, well, at least we've got universal medical coverage. Our Medicare is universal, but our pharmacare is not. It's a real patchwork. Changes completely from province to province. Danielle Smith is just being Danielle Smith. She's become even more predictable than the separatist, and it's really a shame because she's actually quite talented and extremely capable, but she just plays this game constantly. So the ink wasn't dry on the announcement, and she was already saying, a pox on all their houses. Look, somebody's got a friend or family member who's got diabetes, and in some provinces, their medication's costing them a fortune. They're super happy with this. And the Conservatives have to be really careful. I'm anxious to see what they do with this when it really is explained in the House and how they're going to vote. Because what Trudeau is starting to finally figure out is he has to keep adding groups of people if he wants to see his numbers change. So he's looked at something very concrete, people with diabetes or family members with diabetes. That's a large number of people, hundreds of thousands of people across the country. He's saying, this is good for you. And if the Conservatives, Danielle Smith being emblematic of them, come out against it, that goes into the win column for Trudeau, of course, and for Singh. So I think that the Conservatives, the way they just did today on the online harms bill, I think they're starting to figure out that these very facile, sophomoric answers, almost juvenile answers from Poilievre that are very self-satisfying for him and his base, but don't get across to the average Canadian. I think it's going to start playing into his numbers very soon.
We shall see. All right, Tom, thank you so much.
Great to talk to you.